All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm going to be maybe trying to carve out this little dog today. I'm gonna see what I can do. I am just to refresh everyone's memory. I am Jack. I'm a history teacher who's currently on summer break, just kind of filling my time with these fun lectures while I do a hobby I am not particularly good at. So last week I talked a lot about the Roman Empire and its decline and things like that. Really talking about like a people's focus, which is a class I'm supposed to be teaching in the spring. But today I'm going to talk about one of my kind of pet subjects, which is late Roman Britain in the early Middle Ages, especially the sort of history of the Britons or the like Romano Britons, or what someday down the line will eventually be called the Welsh. Now, this one is a subject I actually know a real lot about, and I am going to be focusing on a couple different subjects and talking about these things. I actually do some research on these things. Particularly this one is going to be really pulling from Charles T. Edwards' Wales and the Britons, which, if you're really interested in the subject, is like an absolutely masterful work. It's big, but it's absolutely masterful. It's hard to find a work on the Welsh and early medieval Britain that does not pull on him from the last 10 years. His work is excellent. Now, Britain was a colony or a province of the Roman Empire. It was one of the more recent ones. It was one of their last conquests in the reign of Emperor Claudius. Prior to that, the people, for the most part, were Celtic speakers in Britain. They spoke a type of Celtic language a series of Celtic languages that is related to modern-day Welsh, Breton, and Cornish. There are two types of Welsh. There is Brittonic Welsh, two types of Celtic languages today, that many of which are still spoken today in some parts of the world. There is Brittonic, which includes Welsh being the most common. It is also the most widely spoken Celtic language today. It has the largest amount of first language speakers, I believe around 500,000, though I may have that number wrong. With about 20% of Wales being using it daily. And that is a very high rate for Celtic languages. And the other is Goidelic languages. These are languages that are Irish, Manx, Scottish Gaelic. Irish is I've been told you don't use the term Gaelic to describe just Irish, because Gaelic could describe all of them. Scottish Gaelic you do use because there is a language called Scots that is a different thing. Now, all of Britain, from what we can tell, is speaking Brittonic languages when the Romans arrive, which is similar to what was being spoken in Gaul just somewhat recently, and would continue to be spoken in Gaul, in many parts of Gaul, for a long time. But I digress. It is conquered. It is never a particularly important part of the Roman Empire. It is always sort of a backwater that is basically propped up by Roman administration. We see this with the decline. Now, there has often been more ink spilled about the Roman Britain because so many of our English-speaking historians are British, so they fixate on their place. This is extremely common. You see the same thing in medieval history, how we have this overemphasis. Even in Western European culture, we have this way overemphasis on English history compared to the relevance of things like French, German, Italian. And I'm talking about like Western Europe. We're not even getting into like non-Western history. But I digress. That is what I grew up with. That's what I grew up learning about. So I do really have a passion for it, particularly Brittonic history. Moving on. The Welsh are the people who have been living there. By all accounts, they've been living there for a long time. And they get very Romanized. London is a Roman city. So is York. So is Carlisle. Bath is still is essentially a translated version of what the Romans called it, Aquae Sulis. It is an incredibly Romanized thing. You should not think of it as one thing I do want to say, you should not think of it as a bunch of Italian Roman occupiers occupying the free Celtic peoples. It was the first generation, maybe, but Rome is very quickly Romanizing everyone and really making these people feel part of the empire. In the words of John Morris, a Roman Briton would no more think of himself as a Briton rather than a Roman than a guy from Kent would think of himself as not English because he's from Kent. And I think that's a decent way to understand it. So these people fundamentally view themselves as Romans. They are Romano-Britons. Now, when we get to the 4th century, Britain really Christianizes quite quickly. Its own native religious traditions prior had really been stamped out. The Romans did not like Druids and did not like Celtic religion, really got very cagey about it, so they stamped it out. And while they always followed the Roman gods, it was not with the same level of focus. So they really were fresh ground. In fact, Constantine's mother, who I believe was from Britain, Eleanor Augusta, probably was Christian. Now, as the 5th century progresses, 4th century progresses, Rome is losing its ability to control its area. It is just losing its ability to control the regions around it in the 4th century. We've talked about this with the barbarians, the Goths coming in, and Ammius Marcellinus, who tells us about Adrianople, also tells us about something called the Great Barbarian Conspiracy in Britain. Now, Britain at this time is surrounded by a lot of different peoples. The area that is that is the Roman British province stops around the base of Scotland. It's a little bit south of where we are of the Scottish border today, but we're talking a margin of like 30 miles. We're talking about a margin of 30 miles. But the people in the north were called Picts. Now, we don't really know. We have not known about Picts for a long time, but what we do know now, or pretty confident to say, is that they are essentially un-Roman, with some variants, seem to be essentially un-Romanized Britons. Britons that did not take to Romanization. Their language diverged. It is a Brittonic language. That has often been the question, do they speak a Celtic language? They seem to, though there may be some loan words from older or different languages, and certainly across Scotland there may have been different languages spoken. We have a tendency, again, as I always talk about, to speak about these people in monoliths that do not necessarily reflect the reality. There certainly could have been other languages spoken, but it seems like Pictish, from the inscriptions we see, is Brittonic language that essentially diverged from Southern Brittonic. Then, to the west, we have the Irish. The Irish speak Irish Celtic, in early Irish, Old Irish. They, at this time, are a patchwork of tribes who both enjoyed raiding but also served as mercenaries at times for the Romans, which is not uncommon. Again, Romans are shopping out their military to other people. Finally, we have Germanic peoples that are being settled here again and again and again. The Germanic peoples who are settled in Britain are mostly Saxons, Jutes, and Angles. Saxons being the largest group. Now, Saxons come from Lower Denmark, or Jutes, come from Lower Denmark. Saxons come from Saxony, as the name would imply. They are what the ancestors of who we will call the Anglo-Saxons. As we will talk about, they are not necessarily the genetic ancestors of all of them, but they do have a high relationship with them. And they are brought in as foederati, allies. These allies are brought in. They are used to defend the area. And also as pirates. They were sailors. Now, in 367 BCE, or CE, I'm sorry, not BCE, there was something called the Great Barbarian Conspiracy, where all these groups seem to rise up, in the words of Ammius Marcellinus, ravage Britain. Now, there seems to be groups who seem to side with them, especially in the north, as well as other things going on. But they savage Britain. They attack Britain from all different sides. It takes years to put down this rebellion, and some areas may never really recover Roman administration. This is in 367. And again, the Roman government, imperial government, is losing its ability to really administrate these places. It's having trouble sending armies up there. It's having trouble dealing with this. It's dealing with problems much closer to home than here, so it's really struggling with this. But eventually, after several years, these groups recede. The Irish, Saxons, and Picts. And not understandably, the Romans have often assumed these groups were working together, or at least coordinating their attacks. Not an insane belief based on what we see. For a lot of reasons, but also because of this weakness of administration, the Romano-Britons have a tendency to raise puppet emperors. They raise a couple of them. And this has a lot to do with the fact that the administration is not working. The Italian government, the Western Empire, is no longer able to protect them. So they're trying to find their own ways to defend themselves. Which we see again and again in places in the empire. As the state system breaks down, other people have to step in. The last one of these emperors rises up in 408. I believe I have that right. He is ultimately not successful, but this is also the famous time that Honorius, the emperor of the West at this time, basically writes a letter to Britain saying, handle your own affairs. Worry about your own attacks, look to your own defense. And that is often interpreted as the time officially when the Romans let go of Britain as a conquest, as a province. And Britain seems to have been going that way for a while, but as we'll see over the course of the 5th century, it's not the last time these two groups will interact. And the Romano-Britons still look to Rome in a lot of ways. For instance, British churchmen will still be going to Rome and things like that. They view themselves as Romans for a long time. Now, but the central art organization of their country is shut down. This leaves us with a few different areas. Now, there are Anglo-Saxons and Jutes in the southeast. Anglo-Saxons and Jutes in the southeast. These are Germanic-speaking people coming from Denmark, Germany, that region, and the Netherlands. They are coming from Germany. They are mostly in the southeast. A lot of the county names from England in that area come from this. We get East Anglia from the Angles, Sussex, Wessex. These are both Essex. All three of these are East Saxons, South Saxons, West Saxons. Those names are coming from it, as we'll see. In the north, we still have the Picts. They are settling there. The Irish are also beginning to colonize parts of the west. And then we have the Romano-Britons. And the Romano-Britons are various levels of statehood, power, things like that. As we'll see in my next lecture, because I'm probably going to just end this one in a minute or two. As we'll see, the areas that are least Romanized tend to bounce back the quickest from loss of Roman administration. Makes sense. They had the most independent state structures outside of that. These will be places like Cornwall, Wales, the Northwest. Areas that for a long time will keep a very different nature than places than the English kingdoms around it. And sometimes up to today. The lowland Britain area is really very Romanized. And these people do not have a straight structure outside of Rome. So they often find themselves trying to find their own authority. Some are Roman. Some look to native or Roman leaders. Some will eventually go under the rule of Germanic leaders. Because contrary to an old myth, when the Angles and Saxons take over, and they do, the political balance swings towards Anglo-Saxons over the course of the next 5 centuries. There's been an old myth that they wipe out everyone, that they kill all, or they don't let the men have families and basically breed out the Welsh or Britons. This is partially the way they talk about them, all these things. I'm going to get into this next week because we're getting near our time. But that does not seem to be true. Rather, it seems to be that in a group that kind of lost its way, lost its identity, lost the way it can show authority, the Germanic route offered another way. And we're evidenced by this fact that this is not a particularly clean delineation until much later. We will learn more about that. Now, I'm going to close up on Rome and Britain today. I didn't make too much progress, but it was fun. I am going to come back and talk more about early medieval Rome, or Rome and Britain, next week, and I'm super excited to do that, including talking about my Legend of King Arthur.